Welcome to ACE. Thank you all for being on time. This is our fourth large group lesson, and we're going to be talking about landscape architecture today. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about civil engineering. Today, we're going to talk about landscape architecture, and you'll kind of see how those two different disciplines are different, but also some of the kind of similar features between them and how it's going to help you in your project. So as always, if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to just post them in the chat. We will be monitoring that throughout. But to kind of get started here, so just a few reminders for everyone. Make sure you're checking updates in your small groups classroom. So the small groups are the colors, so orange, green, red, and blue. That's where all your mentors are giving you feedback as well as posting activities and then any other updates that you might need. Also a reminder, activities. Make sure you post those. I know they're called assignments in Google Classroom terminology, but we want to think of it more of an activity. You're putting together this project. Each activity you do kind of builds upon the other one. So at the end, you'll have a complete project. If you feel like you're kind of stuck, like you don't quite know how to get started, I think some of you are kind of stuck at that point, the beginning. Like I told students in my group last week, don't be afraid to just pull out a blank sheet of paper and start sketching out some of your ideas. And also don't be afraid to reach out to your mentors. So you can always email your lead mentor. They may have given you an alternate email address, or you can email them virtual, whatever the color of your group is, at acerdu.org. And also the email address that you get these invites from for virtual ACE at acerdu.org. Your lead mentors also should have notified you if you need your parental consent form. We want to make sure that we get those all in. So if that's kind of slipped your radar, make sure you get that started so that we can make sure that everyone is registered properly. As far as our session schedule goes, we've made a few little tweaks. We thought that you all could probably use some more time just kind of in your smaller groups with mentors, getting feedback on your projects. So we've done a little tweak here. You can see, like, today we're talking about landscape architecture, and next week we'll be talking about sustainability with BSA Life Structures, an architecture firm. And then we're going to squeeze in another small group there on the 19th. So we kind of switched out our virtual construction site tour. I still don't have my dates right on this. So you will have another small group session. You won't have to wait that extra week. So make sure that in that you do work on those activities. That way you'll be able in that small group to get some feedback on your projects. So does anyone have any kind of general questions about ACE before we go ahead and get into Michael's presentation? Okay, and if you do, like I said, just throw them up in the chat. So Michael, does your presentation need any introduction?
No, this week I tried to keep it really short. I heard from some kids that, they were feeling like we were learning so much at one time. So this week is going to be really short and sharp, and the task should be pretty simple. So I think the video is about half my last video I made. So yeah, hopefully we have some time at the end where you can actually go and finish your assignment within the hour. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Michael. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over here and share this video. And if you have any questions as we go through it, obviously just put them in the chat.
Hi everyone, and welcome to ACE. My name is Michael Alderman. I'm with Timmins Group here in Raleigh. I'm a landscape designer, and today I'm going to teach you about landscape architecture. So let's get started. So I know we've thrown a lot at you in the last couple of weeks, so we're going to keep today's lesson short. I'm going to talk about what is landscape architecture and a typical project I would work on here in Raleigh. And then we're going to talk about inspiration images and how those can be used to communicate your ideas. And then we're going to talk about your overall project and this week's site activity. So what is landscape architecture? Landscape architects analyze, plan, design, manage, and nurture the built and natural environments. We design spaces for people and the communities they live, work, and play in. We're often collaborating with architects, engineers, and general contractors. In a typical week, I'm usually in my office, but sometimes if there's a project under construction, we might make site visits, or we'll go and visit other consultants like architects or engineers to share our ideas. So a typical project might be, you might just think of parks, but we do so much more than that. Anything from street design to college campuses. I've worked on a farmer's market plan, a state park, and lots of playgrounds. So any space outside of a building, and sometimes we're placing buildings on a site, it's really up for grabs. So I'm going to go through a quick project example. This is one in Raleigh we did for the city of Raleigh, and it's a master plan called Erinsbrook Park. It hasn't been built yet, but it shows our ideas for the site. So like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, the first place we start is with site analysis. We look at the context, we look at the natural and cultural features of the site, and then that gives us an understanding of the whole site and what our opportunities are for building the park that we want. So you can see here there's a creek buffer at the bottom of the site, as well as some steep slopes around the middle, and then some large existing trees on the right, as well as a big main road on Leesville Road, which will provide us access to the park. So we are serving the client, but we're also serving the community. So part of our job was to ask the community what they wanted at this park, and then try and balance that with what the city of Raleigh, can afford and wants to also provide to the town. So we do that through providing inspiration images. They help people start to understand, their ideas, and then it's more of a conversation between us and them. And then we start to generate goals and objectives, which could lead to something like a mission statement, which we have here. So this is what the community came up for the park. They said they wanted to develop a park where its natural character is celebrated while providing play, exercise, and gathering opportunities for neighborhood families of all ages and abilities. So they wanted this park to be accessible. They wanted to celebrate the creek that was there, but also maybe provide some open areas for exercise or play. So there's a lot that goes into this, and we would come back to this statement to make sure we were staying on the process. So our next step is creating an opportunities and constraints diagram. So you can see that big green blob. We're trying to protect the creek down there where there's the 50-foot riparian buffer. So we designated that as a natural woods conservation area, but we might be able to get down there with a natural surface trail, a couple of bridges, and maybe some small overlooks looking at the creek. Then we also have a parking area off Leesville Drive and an open space that kind of sits in the middle of the park, which kind of ties everything together. And then we have an overlook, which might look over the woods and provide educational opportunities, about the existing trees, the creek, and so on. On the left and right, we have two activity spaces. One is designated as active, so that might be like playgrounds or courts or a dog park, whereas the one on the right we've called out as sensitive, so it might just be a natural walking trail. So we use that as a guide for our concept options. We created 3 concept options, which we showed with the client and the community, and got their feedback. So the first one we showed was really a play on the access. So Leesville Drive is a busy road, so we thought about maybe getting access off that connector drive. But it was a lot of extra pavement, and the community didn't really feel that was necessary. But they liked the overlook, so we kept going. This option just shows the one entry drive with a dog park on the left, which they really liked, and then some open space and playgrounds that were all kind of squashed together. And then most of the park was really designated for that big natural open trail. And then the third option, we had a bigger open space with the parking still at the top, but then there's, you know, an in and an out exit. And they really like that as like a one-way loop to get in and out of the site. This showed a basketball court where the dog park was, but they kind of wanted the dog park more and thought that would get a lot more use with the neighborhood right there. And we're also showing overlooks and a small trail system. So we kind of used all three options and took bits and pieces of each of them to come up with the final plan. So you can see the final concept plan. We have the dog park, the shelter in the middle with the lawn space, a nature overlook, and that kind of conservation area we talked about. But there's other ways of showing the plan. So you can see it in section and you really get a sense of the scale with the people in there and the shelter and the trees. You can kind of feel yourself more in the space and imagine you're there. And then the third option that you can use is inspiration images. So we looked at other nature overlooks and shelters in Raleigh, as well as play spaces and other opportunities to gather. So think about what your space and your project, the kind of images that you can use to help communicate your idea. So we had a couple questions last week or 2 weeks ago about what drafting software do we use. So we start off with our layout design in AutoCAD. And then we're going to bring that into a 3D software like SketchUp, where we start to build up the scene. So those lines, those 2D lines, will create surfaces on like a 3D plane, and then we'll start to add in trees and benches and all the site elements that'll kind of fill up the space. And then we'll take that and we'll bring it into a final rendering engine like Lumion or a SketchUp plugin that'll kind of give us that realistic look, which will really easily communicate our ideas to the client and to the community. So let's talk about your master plan activity this week. Not too long ago, the city of Raleigh asked a landscape architecture firm to come up with a design for the whole of Dorothea Dix Park. And so this is just showing one area, which our site is located in the middle. And the way that they communicated their ideas was through plan. And so they laid everything out and then they drew off images that helped, talk about what kind of different program elements they thought would make sense in this space. So as an example, let's talk about, they've got the sports fields located in the middle there. And so they used images of seating area for spectators. And so you can kind of see what they had in mind. They didn't have big bleachers in mind. They just thought it could be like a rolling hill, which people sit on. And you can see kind of how many people they're expecting for that space. And then they've got a picture of the sports fields which shows lights and striping. So the closer your image gets to communicating your ideas, the more you can use that for people to understand really what you're talking about. And so if we look back at the site activity from a couple of weeks ago, the way we kind of choose what site element would fit in your space is just based on, what we know of the site and the kind of space requirements we have. And if you've been out there, you know that Dorothea Dix is kind of like a campus in the woods. It's very green and there's lots of big trees. And so start to think about, really what makes sense there. And the other thing you want to think about is the people that are using it. And so what experience do you want them to have when they come here? I think we know that it's a superintendent that's staying on the site. So, does he have kids? Does he want them to enjoy nature? Or is this open to the public where anyone can go up? So think about who might be using this space and how big it is and what's there. And so think about what does it fit in with the character of Raleigh and the park. We know Dorothea Dix has been used as a big festival location, but we also know that they do a lot of other programs like yoga, but a lot of those kind of require a large open space. We might not have as much space, so start to think about that and how active it is. Or is it something that's more passive where it's really just we're talking about a bench to sit on and enjoy, kind of a garden space? Or is it a little bit of both where, we know the superintendent might want to read a book out there by the fire, but then, have some friends around and have more of a gathering space. Other opportunities might be, is it an educational space that talks about seasonal plants and pollinators? Or is it somewhere we provide an opportunity for the superintendent to grow their own food? That's a sustainable solution. Something else to think about is, the program that we have might relate to the building. So is there a sustainable way that we can capture the rainwater off the roof and use that to maybe water a garden? And so let's run through this real quick. We're going to add our own landscape master plan program element next to our site. So our site is located in the middle there. We're going to right click on this shape that's provided, and then we're going to roll down to format picture. And then that's going to bring up this tab, and we're going to click the insert function. And then we're going to find an image and save it into a location and choose that image that relates to the program idea that we've chosen. And so I chose to do a tree house. Why not? There's big trees there. But you might want to do something totally different. We'll leave that up to you. But you can see the kind of other things that they've picked out for multi-use paths. They've just got an image of a path with some people walking on it, a gathering space. It's a kind of circle seat with, the woods in the background. So these really help to give you an understanding of what kind of space this is going to be once it gets built. So in summary, we talked about landscape architecture, and it's all about designing spaces for the people that use the space, but also finding a balance with the impact to the environment. We talked about how inspiration images help people understand your ideas. And then this week's task, which is to choose an inspiration image for your landscape. So with that, I'm going to jump off and we're going to answer any questions. All right, thanks. Bye.
Great, thanks, Michael. I think that, so do all of you kind of see how different it was when talking about the differences?
A little bit of both, where,
between, let me mute this. The difference between civil engineering and landscape architecture, were some of you at least able to see, I mean, the names are in the titles, right? Engineering versus landscape architecture is more kind of design related. So that's why this activity is thinking more about, whereas with our site plan activity, we were really thinking about kind of the engineering of it, like where would the building fit on it? How are the grades going to work? Whereas with this activity, we're going to kind of take the next step. So those of you that have done this site activity, and if you haven't, now's the time too to work on that as well. Figure out where you're actually going to locate your house on the site, and then start to think about how you can, what this feels like, the design feel of it, your design inspiration for the site. Do we have any questions? And now is also a good time to ask if you do have any kind of general questions, because so far what we've covered, architecture, civil engineering, landscape architecture, so we're kind of slowly building up what our thoughts are about this project. So Selena's question, so we are proposing for this project, your project, there's only one, but it is your project. So theoretically, maybe if you think there could be an opportunity, and some of the other mentors can jump in here too, for other buildings to go on site, I think that's possible. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Laura, I think that's totally fine. I think I actually walked past the site today, and some of those grades in there are a little bit steeper than they look on the paper. So you've really got a kind of smaller area where a building actually makes sense, kind of towards the left side of the page, I think, hint, hint. But if you feel like, you know, you've got a short driveway and you can stack a few buildings there, I think that's fine. But I don't think it's, yeah. If you only want to do one, I think that's probably the way to go.
So knowing that the grades are steep there, maybe that gives you an idea of what possibly can go there. I know Michael had talked about some stadium seating for one of the areas. Maybe there's a small little amphitheater or something that utilizes the grades to your advantage. So there's other design elements that could utilize a more steeper slope for that back area at least. So think about that.
Hey, Laura, we're on the video where Michael shows his first design, which is just a bunch of circles. I think that's really important for the students to understand that what these people, what they do is they're not worried right off the bat about what this final product is going to look like. They're trying to understand how things might fit. So for the same thing, when you look at your plan, where you have the steep slopes that Zoo just talked about, maybe you just draw a circle and you just think about different things that can go in that circle as the whole plan as a whole, how you want to lay it out. And then you go back and start looking at the details, because the next slide that Michael shows after this one shows more detail. And then the next one shows even more detail. So that's how this whole design process works, is that they start out with just some thoughts on a piece of paper, and then they start developing those thoughts.
Yeah, and William made a good comment here. Yeah, this is what I would call this a bubble diagram, because it's to scale, but it's not, you know, there's a sidewalk here and this here. It's just calling out general spaces. So for your thinking about your floor plan activity, like I said, if some of you are still kind of stuck, you know, you can use the same concept for your just starting to initially think about your floor plan. You know, where are the general spaces going to go? We've got a couple other
Michael,
questions coming in
can you
here.
talk to the students about the difference between an architect and a landscape architect, and what education is different between the two fields?
Yeah, sure, Bill. And you made a good point about the bubble diagram. And one of the best things that my teacher told me was to use a big, like really fat Sharpie when you're starting out. And that just keeps everything, you know, you can't even get into detail. You have to do big bubbles. And then once you get started, then you can start overlaying that with, you know, your pens and sidewalks like Laura was talking about. But for me, it might have been a little different. Depending on what school you go to, there's different paths of landscape architecture. But my first year, actually, I was with the architecture students in design school, and we all kind of learnt the same things. And then after that first year, we branched off into landscape as opposed to architecture, which was, you know, really focused on buildings as opposed to the land and ecology, and the environment was really important. So I think it's a 4-year course I think both courses are 3-year bachelor and 2-year master degrees, but it really depends on what school you go to. There's 2 colleges in North Carolina that offer a landscape architecture program. I think NCA&T in Greensboro, I think it is, offers the bachelor program, whereas NC State only offers the master's program. So I think you could do like an architecture bachelor and then change over and get your MLA as a landscape architect, or, you know, you might think about going outside of North Carolina, but we won't suggest that because you want to stay here.
And then are there any licensing requirements like we talked about with architecture?
Yeah, so I'm actually doing that process now. You need 4 years of experience working as a professional, working under a registered landscape architect, and then there's a 4-part test that you have to sit. So it's a long process to be registered, but you can start working as a landscape architect or a landscape designer, as I'm called, straight after you graduate.
So speaking of being out of state, Michael, can you talk a little bit more about native plant species? Like, you know, if you were a landscape architect in Florida, it's going to be a lot different than in North Carolina. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one thing that really came up a lot in my degree was trying to find what's called a sense of place when you're designing. So when you think about a sense of place, what does that mean? It's when I'm designing this park, I think about all the things that I think about when, you know, you think of Raleigh, you think of the oak trees that are here, you think of the grasses that are in, you know, the creek lines, and those start to really tell a story about the place that you're in. And so plants are a really good way of telling the story of the place you're in, and you feel like, oh, I'm in Raleigh right now. I'll look at these great big oaks, and there's just a feeling you get. So, you know, when you go to Australia or wherever you might go when the pandemic is stopped, you know, the trees are totally different. There's big eucalypts, there's banksias, and it's just like a whole different world. And that's really like one thing I've really come to love about North Carolina is how green it is. And so, yeah, I don't want to get too much into like, you know, the soils that, you know, it takes to grow different plants here, but just understanding that using native species helps tell the story of the place that you're in.
And do you want to describe what you mean by sense of place, if you can?
I tried to do that. Hopefully, I got some way there, but yeah, sense of place. It's the experience that you have when you're in a particular location, and that you just don't feel like you could be anywhere else in the world. You know, so like I said, you wouldn't necessarily, you know, build a big mountain lodge at the beach because it just doesn't feel right. But there's certain types of architectural characteristics that belong to a place. There's also, and I talked about this in the video, there's certain characteristics that the community has. So, you know, different populations gather in different ways. It's really great. That's one of the best things about traveling, is that you see different cultures and the way that they interact as a community. And you'll find differences in, you know, Oakwood versus Boylan Heights or downtown Raleigh. Like different areas, there's just a different characteristic and way people live and work.
Yeah, I mean, just think about like desert environments in Arizona versus tropical environments in Florida. So if you're in Florida, you kind of know you're in Florida because of, again, the plant species, also the temperature. I mean, that kind of gives it away as well. And the climate. And in Seattle, you know, they always talk about it. It's always overcast and rainy and wet. So the sense of place encompasses all those things, including the plants.
And for those of you that are excited about landscape architecture, I would encourage you, you all are very fortunate to have these computers and you can Google, but we're in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, and you could Google plants native to the Piedmont region of North Carolina, and you can find a whole list of plants that you might get excited about.
And Michael, I have a question as well. I know the city of Raleigh, for a lot of their projects, has been focusing on sustainable designs in their landscapes, so permeable pavers and rain gardens and all that stuff. Would you mind talking a little bit about sustainability in landscape design and kind of integrating natural areas in with kind of occupied, used spaces?
Yes, I mean, sustainability has to permeate through everything we do, every decision we make. We know that trees are really important, and so we try and avoid the roots of trees because we can't grow them quick enough to how much they're getting cut down. We know that hard surfaces create faster runoff, and then those take nutrients into the rivers and streams. So I think someone asked, is there a stream nearby? And on this this diagram that this landscape architecture firm made, you can see at the top there is actually a stream that they're trying to rehabilitate, bring back native species that help stop erosion, they help stabilize the soil, they help clean the water. And that's one thing that's a real problem in Raleigh and developing cities is with there's so much hard surface, so you don't have to fill up the site with a bunch of things just for the sake of it. Really think about what you're doing, and is it really needed, or can we get away with using more natural materials? Another big thing is using local materials instead of the embodied energy of bringing over a marble slab from somewhere else in the country. Maybe we can use local wood, local stone that doesn't take so much energy to bring all the way over to North Carolina here in Raleigh. So we start to think about embodied energy, and I know that's big in architecture as well. So there's 100 different things that we can do. Any little bit helps, but reading, the city of Raleigh does a great job of making some of these things, inbuilt into the code. So, you have to obey that ordinance.
I have a question regarding the local wood that you mentioned and using local products. Is there any way we can look up what those are? Like any site that might have all those laid out?
Yeah, I think for wood products, your local timber factory, they're really knowledgeable. You can always give them a call. You can tell by the types of species that grow here. So we have a lot of pine trees here. So pine is available, oak's available. You can just kind of tell by what species are native to what's locally available, and kind of compare the two. That's kind of the best you can do. A lot of the time, that'll be an option at local sawmills and stuff like that.
And next week, we will specifically be talking about sustainability too. So we'll get more into like the architecture kind of general side of it as well.
Thank you.
So these are all good questions.
So we've been hearing from some students that they are new to the program, which is great. And this virtual program is something that's extremely new to us, but it's also good that we have a tool that we can use to reach out to you all and educate. But if you don't ask questions, we can't help answer your concerns. And so in hearing from several mentors, they're getting questions from students that are saying, I don't really know where to begin. I don't understand this. And so one of the things that I would encourage you all is that you can post your questions so that you don't have to talk in person. But we as mentors want to work with you and get you excited about the ACE fields. We've got architects, we've got engineers, we've got contractors, all of whom are excited about the fields in which they're working. And we think we can provide you a lot of insight and a lot of answers to your questions. But we all have decided that we are not very good at reading minds. And so we need you all to ask us what is your concerns, and then we can address those. So please feel, as Laura said at the start of the session, to reach out to us. You have email addresses. You know, you can reach out to us, and we're more than happy to try and get you answers and get you through this activity, as she described it, because it's exciting to learn about these fields.
And here, just, in case where some of you are still a little lost as to where we are, I think we've talked about this before, but so here is downtown Raleigh. And if we come down here, here's Dorothea Dix Park. Here's where the State Farmers, I'm trying to pick things that you all probably know. The State Farmers Market is right here. And I'm sure some of you have been to the park for soccer fields, things like that. So this is kind of the general site. So when we were looking at, this kind of image, this is kind of what they're envisioning for this. So our site, someone knows the site better than me.
Yeah, so that big double road there is Western Boulevard, or it connects to Martin Luther King Boulevard. And so there's a creek that runs along that whole stretch of road. So we're just on the other side of the creek. Yeah, you can see it there. There's a greenway trail. It's quite nice, but the creek needs some rehabilitation. It's a bit out of shape. So I think the city of Raleigh is really interested in bringing back some of the natural character that creek used to be in. It's very straight right now, and typically creeks are bendy and stuff like that. So this has been very formalized. Whereas, this plan, a lot of the landscape architectural suggestions were bringing back some of the natural elements right near the city. So yeah, we're up there on the hill. So I think someone asked about the water table. It is uphill from the creek, so you don't really have to worry about the water table or flooding. And there's some great, large trees there to think about shade and stuff like that.
And also remember, we do have that site video posted in your classroom resources too, for those of you that kind of need a refresher. And that might help you, as we're talking about what it feels like to see what it already is like. That might help you make some connections there too. Grace has a great question about, so we talked about in the civil engineering lesson, the 20-foot setback. Can we have landscaping in the setback area?
Yeah, absolutely. Setbacks really only relate to the building and where you can place the building. You can put a driveway in a setback, you can put fencing, but landscaping's the best thing you can do there. So yeah, think about what makes sense. If you put too much landscaping, the building's may not be visible from the road. Maybe you want that. I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about it, but just think about when you're placing trees and landscaping things, what effect it has, and the decisions you make will have an effect on the feeling and experience of the site.
Hey, Michael, should the students for the landscape plan?
You're a little quiet there, Bob.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. For the landscape design, should the students consider any public use of the area around the tiny home, or is it strictly intended for private use for the people who live there?
Right. I thought about this too, Bob, and that's a good question. It is a private residence, but it isn't a public park. So I think you can decide what you want to put there. That's totally fine. I think whoever lives here is going to be well aware that people are going to be walking around this park. So that's why I said a fire pit or something like that that can be used just by the owner, or it could be used by the public if they wanted to show up. But I mean, it's something to think about. And when you do, place your element, you might want to update your site plan and label it as, this thing, and just start to think about the decisions, like I said, as, and that might be something you talk about.
I saw Grace had an idea here about a community garden. That might be a good idea.
Yeah, just think about what's in your neighborhoods, and think things that you like. I think that's one of the best things about landscape architecture, is that you just have to walk outside of your house to start learning. And you can walk down the street and you just can pick up, oh, okay, so this person, they put a tree here and the sidewalk's there, and that's where they put the bench. You're always learning. And so think about your own experiences and things you like, and that's the best way to learn.
I have 2 questions. Would that be all right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So one, I don't have access to PowerPoint, and I see here on the assignment that it only works on PowerPoint. So what should I go about doing?
If you just post an image that you find,
Yeah, okay.
that would be perfectly acceptable. All we're really
Okay.
looking for is the image.
Okay, cool. And so I put a question in chat. It was about construction vehicles. So because there's going to be a big construction site, right? And lots of construction,
Yes.
vehicles roaming about the place. Is that going to drive over, do we need to account for that? Because they're large and wide.
Well, I think because if you think about, it's going to be going on, I mean, this would be right, I think the program says a couple of years it will be here. So it's not permanent, but yeah, there will be traffic, but it would probably be on the bigger stuff will be on the bigger roads, and there would be, the building will be there 10 years. Okay. There will be, so yes, short answer, yes, there will be construction traffic. But I would think back where this is, it wouldn't be as heavy as some of the other areas.
Okay, yeah, cool. Because I know that I guess my freshman year, so 2 years ago at our site visit, we had to drive through a neighborhood, and they did a bunch of stuff there where all the construction things had to get washed off and all that.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would assume there's no construction vehicles on that site that we're working on
Okay, that's cool. Alrighty.
for the program.
So what you do need to consider is how do you access the site before the road's in? If you're going to set your building back there, you might have to put a temporary road to the building. If there's trees on the site, you don't want any vehicles driving in the drip line of the trees, because that'll kill the trees. And you don't want to stack material around the trees that are existing, so you might need a little site plan that shows a tree protection fence around existing trees.
Okay.
So you want to kind of look at, I don't know how many are out there, but you'd want to look at that and be sure you're not doing that.
Alrighty, cool. And then is construction noise, is that something we have to also consider? That'd be an issue.
Yeah. Well, construction noise, there's usually an ordinance that you can only work from 8 to 5. And I would think within that constraint, you should be fine.
Okay, cool. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Good questions, Beckett.
Yeah, so when we get our design on paper, and then we start adding details, in a typical project we'll come up with a set of construction documents, and along with that construction documents will be what's called a project manual, and that'll have all the specifications for when people can work, like work hours, the types of materials that will be accepted when the person starts to build this. And so that project manual becomes a really important tool in overseeing construction and making sure that they're building it to your plan. So one of the items might be the tree protection fence, and it has to be so high and has to be kept up throughout construction to save those trees. So yeah, I didn't really get into construction documents and stuff like that today. I think we just want to focus on big picture. You know, think about your design, and we can always figure out, you know, the details like that down the road. And that's one thing I should mention is when you go to school for landscape architecture, you might not have to think about so much of the details. Depending on what school you go to, it might be very design oriented, and they want you to think about the experience and the communities and sustainability and stuff like that. But if you're in construction, you might have to, you know, be really focused on those details when you're in school or on the job as an apprentice or something like that. So don't feel like you need to learn everything all at once. You might, you know, pick it up as you go, and that's totally fine.
And I'll
Hey,
probably say
Laura.
this at every session that we have. You know, remember, there's all that, you know, we're talking about all these different aspects. There's a lot of different people on it that are going to work on a project throughout design and construction. So we're kind of giving you like a little taste of each little bit so that you can get a better idea of what actually does go on in a building project. So Michael's from the perspective right now talking earlier on in a project, whereas Reed with comments about like basically a logistics plan that's more towards the construction end. So I think this is a good way again to show you how all these different players are involved in an actual building project.
Hey, Laura, we have a question from a student about redrawing contours. And
Oh
did you
yeah,
see
I saw
that?
that. I saw that and then I got distracted. So showing regraded contours, I don't think I have a good example pulled up, but Michael, do you want to? I thought I saw you reaching to unmute.
Oh, I don't know if I have one open. I don't know if you need to think about it. Oh, there's a great one.
There, good. Thanks, Sue.
So you can see here that the dashed lines are the existing topography, and then they're trying to pull it down so that the slope is consistent. That's something you learn in like second year landscape architecture. I don't think you need to really go down that road for this. If you want to have a go at it and, you know, try and pull the grades and make a consistent even slope and then tie it back into the existing contours, definitely that's great, and we can comment on it on the Google Classroom. But that's definitely not necessary for, you know, your site design, I don't think.
If you want to have some fun, you know, you can get a whole bunch of cardboard and cut out the contours and just lay them back and glue them up. And it's a pretty easy way to depict what your site's going to look like. You first have to kind of draw the contours, but that's kind of fun to do.
Okay. Any other questions?
Does everybody know what is it? Pavers are that let water go through them?
Permeable pavers.
Permeable paver. That's the word I was looking for. Does everybody know what that is? Or what the difference between like a hard concrete sidewalk is and a permeable paver sidewalk?
And you all have probably seen a permeable paver before. You just might not have known it.
Yeah, watching a video of permeable pavement in a parking lot is also really eye-opening.
Yeah, so basically a permeable paver, water goes through and collects underneath in a cistern type stone, and it gets released over time. And concrete or asphalt, it all gets right there and goes right into the catch basin or something. So it distributes the water easily, more easily. There you go.
So I mean, the biggest thing is you want to keep as much water on the site as possible, because anything that runs off, I think Michael mentioned the word runoff. When you have hard surfaces that don't allow any penetration, like you're seeing right here, it will eventually need to go into probably our water treatment system. So that isn't the ideal situation. We always want to kind of get the water back into the natural aquifer or the water table, so that the ecology remains at equilibrium. Whereas if we do a lot of hard surfaces, our water treatment system and plants will have to account for additional water to be treated. So when you see these large ponds around like Walmarts where there's a giant parking lot, those large ponds are basically runoff water that they collect, and that water slowly, I guess, matriculates into the soil, because that pavement isn't permeable like what we're discussing right here is. So you got to think about water treatment and how you're going to address that on your site.
It really comes to light if you go down to the ocean and you swim next to where a river enters the ocean, and you see all the mud and silt where that comes in, and you go up the beach of 100, 200 feet and it's nice and clear. So we're trying to keep all the mud out of the ocean.
Yep. And so, we sometimes address that with the ponds. So when you see these ponds around large developments, they look nice, but functionally they're there to help slow the water down or hold the water somewhere because it doesn't have anywhere to go.
Also called retention ponds, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and actually,
For
if
those of
you
you that might be new to ACE, don't let us overwhelm you right now with all this different stuff. You don't have to worry about where you're going to put permeable pavers on your project. But I still think it's good to know, we want you to be able to know what all these different terms that we throw out there are. But don't remember, you're just pulling out an image. And for those who want to do like a diagram, that would be great too. But don't let us think that we're expecting you to specify permeable pavers for your project.
Hey, there's a test next week. What are you talking about?
We've had a couple questions I see in the chat about building a physical model. So, typically when we met in person, each team did build a physical model of the project. It's not a requirement this year. However, I think even Zoo commented earlier, if it's something that down the line you would want to, if it would help you think about the 3D space. I mean, when I was in architecture school, I made a lot of just little tiny models out of like leftover cereal boxes, just to like think about like a sketch, like a little sketch on paper, but in 3D. And that might help you too as you're thinking about building design, how that might sit, print out your site plan, you can sit it on there and kind of turn it around. If you're doing 2 stories or one, that might help you too. So we don't have a requirement for a physical model this year. But you are more than welcome to do it. You've all gone through drawing to scale, so it's really just a matter of finding a scrap piece of cardboard with your scale and doing a little model. Yeah, draft models, study models. I graduated with like a whole box of them that I couldn't bear to throw away for a while.
I remember my first class, they asked us to make a model. And I thought it was fine, and it was like a week before things were due, and they just picked it up and threw it in the bin. They were like, "You can do better than this." So, but that's a cautionary tale. Choose landscape architecture instead.
And I had, kind of circling back to Michael's comment earlier about education, is I have a degree in architecture. I went to Ball State University, and we had a similar first-year common program. So it was architecture, landscape architecture, and we also had an urban planning program. So our first year, we were all together just learning about general design. So when we keep throwing out all these things, like design is the same in general, and then we branched off into our individual choices.
Yeah, I studied abroad in Europe for one semester, and that it was actually within the science school. So depending on where it is, some people, it could be more engineering heavy for landscape architecture. Some, it can be arts heavy, it can be architecture. So when you look at their course program, when you go to apply to these schools, read the descriptions and see what you're getting into and what college they're in. So you know what, to expect.
Yes, good point, Michael.
Michael,
So we're, oh,
yeah, just a quick question. The developing of a site with a building, is a lot of communication between the landscape architect and the building architect?
yes. Short answer, yes.
Yeah, so typically, you might have 3 or 4 different consultants. You might have an architect, a landscape architect, or an engineer, but one of those will be the lead. And so, everyone has a place at the table, but the final decision usually comes down to whoever's leading the project or whoever's the expert that's dealing with that. And the more you can talk and build a relationship with your consultants, your peers, the easier it is to make those kind of hard decisions or rely on them to make the decision for you.
And John has a good point. It's important, we're always talking about all these different players, so communication is always really important between everyone on every project. Okay, well, we're winding down here. I want to flip back just to make sure everyone gets a look at our upcoming schedule. So for this specific activity, Anthony, it's in Classroom now. You'll all see it posted in Classroom now. It's just choose one image, kind of like what we did for the tiny home research, but one image that really talks to how your landscape design should feel. Okay. So our next meeting is next week. I'm sure you've all figured out by now. All of our meetings are from 5 to 6. Monique in BSA will be talking about sustainability. Link again here. Obviously, our small group sessions, we will have, so next week, large group lesson, following week, small group session. Just everything, keep up in Google Classroom for all this information. Make sure you post your activities. And if you feel stuck, post that too. If you just, not quite where to start, I think we've given you lots of ideas here as far as finding images, doing some bubble diagrams, and really just kind of think about, your site design for this project. So a few of us will stick on for a few minutes if anyone does have any last questions, but I do want to respect everyone's time in case you do need to jump off for something else. And we will see you all again next week at 5.
Hey, Laura, before you go, we got another question right there at the end from a student wanting to know more about the specifics of this assignment.
Yeah, just find an image. That's the specifics. The template itself has a spot to put it into a more of a presentation format, but if anyone doesn't have PowerPoint, and we can work through that. Just find an image is really an image of your kind of inspiration for your landscape design of this project, the site design around the building. Does that answer your question, Anthony, if you're still with us?
Yeah, that clears it up.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
I got a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so will we be doing anything or are we gonna make the actual site or together, or no? Is that up to somebody else?
Are you talking about a site model?
No, but the actual physical
It's pretend. This is all a hypothetical project.
I see. And what are our groups our groups for this project, how will that work?
So it's an individual. So unlike when we met in person, because I think you've been with us in person, it's an individual project or working in a pair. So if there's someone else in your small group that you know from doing ACE before or you go to school with, you can pair up with them, but you're just working on your own throughout the whole length of the project. So I know when we did meet in person, sometimes we'd start off with some individual stuff and then form into groups, but this is all individual the whole way through.
And also, do you think later on we will be meeting in person, or?
No, I don't think so. We've put together this virtual curriculum, and I think it's safe to say that we will be meeting virtually through the end of February.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. A question I see about the code to join the Google Classroom. I emailed that to you because it is different for each small group. But if you check your email, you should have the code.
Hi, I'm new here,
Okay.
so I'm
Yep,
kind
I saw you
of
sign up.
I'm kind of a little lost on like where to start.
So what I would do is the advantage is all of these presentations have been recorded.
Okay, I saw that.
Yep. So I would just start from the beginning, and someone will be reaching out to you with a code for a Google Classroom.
Okay.
So don't get overwhelmed. We've had a couple activities, but I think you've got time to kind of get caught up here. So I will make sure that your lead mentor gets your info to get you the Google Classroom code, and then just watch all of these large group recordings or sessions, or just like what you've seen here, where we have a presentation and then a discussion afterwards and an introduction to the activity.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Bryce, before you sign off, after you review it, if it doesn't make sense or you can't figure out what you need to be doing, contact the lead mentor.
Okay.
And say, hey, I'm new, I'm late, but I want to learn, and they will work with you.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Bryce.
All right. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Great job, all.
Yeah,
that was really good.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, another great job, Michael. We may have to just make you full-time presenter.
No, it took a couple tries this week. I don't know. My brain is getting mushy.
Oh, good. We appreciate it.
Michael, I like how you mentioned the difference in plants between Australia and moving here, and how you enjoy it here. I think you failed to mention all the lack of poisonous spiders and animals that we also don't have here. There are a lot fewer things trying to kill us here.
I've seen more snakes here than I have back home, but
yeah, that's fair.
They might not have been trying to kill me here.
Probably not.
Although I was on the Eno River and I saw what I think was a copperhead, or one of those dangerous ones you got. It was a beautiful orange stripy snake, but I was like, getting the hell out of there.
Tastes like chicken.
So I see, William, you have a question about just the landscape. So this activity, it's kind of, your site activity thought about where the building is going to go, kind of engineering. How's it going to fit with the grades? Now we're thinking more design, like feel aspect of it. So what's an image? So it does build off that depending on how you locate it on your site. And like I think we talked about earlier too, maybe after you look up some ideas for what this site design might feel like, you decide you want to kind of shift how your building's on site. That is fine too. Okay.
Do we use the site activity sheet, or do we just find something on the internet?
There's a whole new assignment. It's in Classroom now.
Okay.
And if you don't have access to the software, like I said, just post an image. That'll work.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Thanks, William. Okay. I think we're mostly mentors. Hannah, I see you're the last, I think, student here. Any question, or are you still just hanging on? Okay. I think we're good. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Do you all have any questions? Oh, she was thinking.
I think we're good. Looks like, yeah, sustainability is next one, and that one's pretty much done. Then we are going to do that open feedback session for that small group. I think that's going to help maybe catch people up and opportunity for students to ask more questions. And so AEC is pretty much done, and then interior design